All right, today we are discussing self-talk, the way we talk, and how it shapes mentality as coaches and athletes. So, self-talk itself is always present, even when we think we're being neutral. The nervous system is still interpreting information. But the question isn't whether self-talk exists, it's whether it's helping or quietly hurting performance. And this matters all the time in training, but it matters most when the margin for error is small, like competition day or where we have heavy attempts, or where moments where execution decides outcomes. So today we'll be covering four main things. First, defining what self-talk actually is. Second, how language creates a mental environment that affects performance. Third, how athletes experience that said environment. And finally, and most importantly, how coaches shape it, especially when athletes are nervous or under pressure. Now, this isn't about becoming overly careful with words or turning coaching into a psychology, even though sometimes it does kind of feel like it. This is about understanding how communication affects output when pressure is high. So as we go through this, I want you to think about the last time an athlete was nervous or missed a lift and what mattered more in that moment, the cue itself or how you delivered it. So defining self-talk. Self-talk is the ongoing internal commentary that influences how an athlete focuses, interprets stress, and executes. It's not motivational language. It's not just positive or negative thinking. It's the internal framework that the nervous system uses to decide how to respond under load. So whether an athlete is aware of it or not, that framework is always active. Now, a common example we hear in powerlifting is the poverty bench, where athletes call their bench poverty because it's typically weaker than their squat or deadlifts. But that's really just an example. But when you call a lift that way, you aren't describing a technical limitation. You're framing the lift and essentially putting it in a box. So most athletes, when they think they're being, or most athletes think they're being realistic or joking when they say this, but the nervous system doesn't necessarily process jokes like that. It processes your expectations. So if the expectation is low for the bench press, your intent behind it drops. And when intent drops, the lift also drops. So that causes you to not approach it as a skill that needs development. The lift becomes something you tolerate, manage, or simply just get through. So your bench essentially just doesn't have the same amount of execution or intent, therefore resulting in slower progress. So self-talk doesn't just describe performance, it creates that mental environment that the lift is performed in. It shapes execution, influences intent, or it shapes expectations, influences intent or execution, and sets the tone under pressure. By the time an athlete touches the bar, their nervous system is working in high gear, deciding whether this feels familiar, controllable, or uncertain. And this environment directly affects intent and execution. So self-regulation at the elite level, this isn't unique to just powerlifting. This is Michael Phelps on the screen here. At the highest level of sports, athletes actively regulate their internal dialogue. Elite performers don't leave their mental environment to chance. They control what they focus on, how they interpret stress, and how they reset after mistakes. So self-regulation is a performance skill that can be learned, and it's not necessarily a trait. But I want you to take it from two former athletes, with Aaron Donald, a former elite football player, and Sonia Richards-Ross, a former Olympic gold medalist.
Who you work for right here? Who you work for? All that training you did, everything you do is for this right here. Come on, hey. Come on. You're living the dream. How bad you want it? How bad you want it? How bad you want it? Make the big play, huh? Make the big play. Huh? Controlled aggression. Controlled aggression.
Now here is Sonia Richards.
My sports psychologist helped me to, first of all, be present in the moment. I think I like to call it monkey chatter, those negative thoughts that you cannot turn on and off. They just come in and tell you you're not ready, you're not prepared, it's not your time. And my sports psychologist kind of taught me how to flow with that. And whenever I had a negative thought about, well, you didn't do it in 2008, I would say, yeah, that's right, but I'm doing it today. He taught me how to fight negativity, but with positivity. And so then you change your thought process around to saying, I've had a great season. I've beat all these girls before. I'm prepared. I'm deserving. And all those things kind of help to allow you to go out there and run from a positive place.
So the important thing here is that these elite athletes don't wait for something to go wrong before they start to regulate. They are regulating constantly through routines, language, and reset behaviors. If we take a look at Aaron Donald in that first video, he was repeating to himself before the biggest game of his career at that point, the Super Bowl. And then if you take Sonia Ross, she repeats all these phrases to her before she steps onto the track. So from the athlete's perspective, the mental environment shows up in three ways. The first place it shows up is intent. Intent is how decisively an athlete commits to the rep or the unrack, the descent, and the drive. When the mental environment is noisy or uncertain, intent softens, and when intent softens, execution tends to follow. Second, confidence under load, how confident they are in their own abilities and capabilities, having trust in their setup, their technique, and their ability to finish. Confidence under load isn't bravado, it's predictability, knowing what the lift is going to feel like when it's heavy. And third, willingness. This is the athlete's willingness to push a lift when it becomes challenging or difficult, spending time to refine it in training and staying patient through the plateaus. When a lift becomes stressful or unreliable, they become cautious, disengaged, or even resistant. And when the environment is poor, all three start to quietly suffer. Now, from the coach's point of view, this is where responsibility for us increases. This is where coaching stops being just programming and cueing. We help shape the mental environment athletes train and compete in. Every interaction we have with an athlete sets context, even before we speak. Tone, body language, pacing, facial expression, all of it communicates something. Athletes are constantly reading us, especially when they are unsure, nervous, or under high amounts of pressure. Our language, tone, and timing matter most when arousal is high, or even when it's low, not when everything is going perfectly. Because when everything is going well, athletes don't need much from us. Their execution is automatic, their confidence is stable, and they're not overthinking. But when pressure rises, with heavy attempts, competition day, long waits between attempts, or unexpected misses, the athlete's internal system becomes less reliable. That's when our influence as a coach actually grows. In these moments, the coach becomes the anchor. Athletes are subconsciously looking to us to answer answer questions in those moments, but we often focus on finding the perfect cue. Athletes don't need us to be perfect, they need us to be consistent. Consistent language and tone builds familiarity. Familiarity builds trust, and trust stabilizes execution. When arousal is high, in moments of high arousal, performance is most sensitive. If we are taking just comp day, this happens in the area, on the platform, or simply when things don't go as planned. These all raise or maybe even lower arousal, and that's when execution becomes fragile. As arousal fluctuates, attention changes, and processing capacity isn't the same. And that's completely normal, but it changes what the athlete needs from us as their coach. When lifters are nervous, internal dialogue becomes noisy and less reliable. Their ability to self-regulate drops, and athletes start looking outward for stability. This is where coaches matter most, because external cues, tone, presence, and I cannot stress enough, our body language carry more weight than usual. When athletes are nervous, their internal voices get loud, but less useful. Before they hear what we say, they feel a presence, posture, and body language. In high arousal situations, we often become the athlete's external talk, like I mentioned. What we say and how we say it gets internalized and replayed by the athlete, especially after nerves spike or their confidence starts to waver. Coach language becomes the athlete's internal script. They just don't hear us, they often internalize us. What we say between attempts often become what they repeat to themselves on the platform. Now, one common example is missed lifts. They are stress multipliers. They amplify the same process we see with nerves, elevated or depleted arousals, uncertainty, and a greater need for regulation. The athlete is already either elevated or sitting very low, which means how a coach communicates after a miss often determines whether the next attempt stabilizes their performance or unravels the performance. One key performance variable is tone. Tone is a performance variable because it communicates meaning faster than words. It tells the nervous system whether the situation is under control or becoming a threat. Threat doesn't necessarily mean danger. It means uncertainty under load, and uncertainty reduces commitment, coordination, and confidence. The same words delivered with different tones produce different outcomes. If you say something calmly, it signals control. If you say it urgently, it signals threat. And if you say it with frustration, it signals failure. All the same words, both different tones and different outcomes. Now, when arousal is high, the goal isn't to fix the lift, it's to protect the athlete's ability to execute. That means prioritizing familiar language, giving one clear priority, and maintaining a composed presence. It also means being intentional with our emotional delivery. Emotion can help when arousal is too low, but when arousal is already high, adding urgency or intensity often creates more noise and not better output. At almost every moment, we answer one question. Does this athlete need more energy or less? Showing emotion isn't a bad thing. Often it's actually great, but mismatched emotion is a bad thing. But we as coaches have self-talk and our own regulation too, especially under pressure with missed lifts, tight timelines, or judging calls that we just simply don't agree with. Stress leaks. It leaks through tone, body language, and how quickly we speak. Even when we think we're being calm, athletes can feel we're rushed, frustrated, or even uncertain. The goal isn't to be emotionally neutral, it's to be regulated. Because if a coach is elevated, the athlete's nervous system reads that as confirmation that something is wrong. If a coach is frantic, the athlete doesn't feel supported, they feel urgency. And urgency under load often leads to hesitation, overcorrection, or forced execution. One of the most effective things a coach can do in high stress moments is absolutely nothing extra. No added emotion, no rapid fire cues, no visible frustration after a miss. Calm isn't being passive, it's being deliberate. When we regulate ourselves, we give athletes a stable reference point, we become predictable, and predictability under pressure creates safety, and safety allows execution. Regulation starts with us because we can't calm someone else or can't calm down someone else if we cannot calm ourselves. Big takeaways from this: self-talk affects performance, the mental environment shapes execution, and coaches disproportionately influence that environment, especially under pressure. It isn't about saying the perfect thing, it's about creating conditions where athletes can execute what they've trained, and that is the perfect thing because clarity beats correction when pressure is high. In the moments that matter the most, the environment often makes the difference. We don't just coach the lifts or provide a spreadsheet. We coach how athletes think, interpret stress, and perform under pressure. Most importantly, we coach humans. And in these moments, how we communicate can either unlock performance or quietly cap it. And that is all.
I'm the only person unmuted, so I was not going to clap too loudly there because it would just be a solo. I just want to jump in straight away and say that was fucking excellent. Like, that's really, really good. Genuinely, really well done. On top of that, there's so much stuff you covered, so I hope no one minds. There's things I wanted to jump into straight away, because there's a thing you mentioned right at the beginning. I have a ton of notes, but there's a thing you mentioned right at the beginning, which I think is a common misunderstanding, because I made a piece of content ages ago about self-talk, and I got indirect grief about being like, oh, just wanting us to be positive, blah, blah, blah. But what you said about self-talk isn't just positive. This is an entire spectrum of behavior. And also the biggest thing was like the clip you played, I've forgotten the lady's name, but it's not that negative self-talk will stop. It's about having a response prepared for that negative self-talk. So I'm guessing like you would advocate for the same, but like for athletes, not to deny the negative self-talk, but the preparation for how to reply to it, right?
Yeah, that's the biggest thing, is like it's going to happen. Like, those doubts are going to creep in, especially competition day. The negative self-talk, that's all going to creep in, but like how we respond to it mentally is going to help shape how you perform on that platform.
At any point anyone wants to speak? Yeah, right, go you.
I want to chime in with that as well. It's not just how you say it on the platform, but how you say it day to day within training. Obviously, you mentioned about being like the bench press being in the box, and a lot of that's going to be regulated or spoken about again within communication with your coach on a day or athletes on a day-to-day basis. And it's how you respond to such wordings that can also lead to a positive outcome on the competitive platform.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's one thing we as coaches have to do as well, because chances are if your athletes are calling their bench a poverty bench, they've said it to their friends, they've said it on social media, and they probably said it to you. So like being able to help them reshape that mindset immediately in private conversations is good. It's just going to go such a long way.
I actually want to say the same, but to the opposition of like the whole specialist argument of it's kind of the total inverse of people, much like myself, like having been considered a bench specialist for such a long time, that makes it very excusable for me to not try as hard on squat and deadlift, and that is otherwise absolutely unacceptable unless I'm in a bench only comp. That's the only time that gets acceptable, right? So it's really, really important that, like, for me, it's been a big challenge of rewiring that within people. So say, for example, like deadlift specialist is a really big one of being like, a deadlift specialist does not mean that you have a poverty bench. A deadlift specialist literally just means that you have to focus more and pay more respect to a bench press so that you can get it to a level that you are proud of, right? Not necessarily that you can just float on up there, but that it takes a really consistent effort, and probably more so than the one that you are more biomechanically inclined towards.
Yeah, I agree. I think part of that too is like when we take the deadlift, for example, a lot of the times people are just built to deadlift, and that's why they're just going to have a stronger deadlift compared to the other two. And that doesn't mean you suck at the other two. It's just how the cards played.
Can I just, one of the things that I know that this was a particularly interesting conversation for Amelia as well. And this is because we have a lot of conversations about, well, actually people, when we talk in the world of physio and rehab, of how people define injury and pain. So you can see where I wanted to go with this, right?
Yeah, I mean, what I was going to say, like, literally for me, like the talk from a physio perspective is huge, because even when we're talking to like our athletes on a day-to-day basis, the way that we frame, is it injury? I think pointing at yourself. Is it injury or is it just irritation? Like, even like athletes talking to themselves about those things, like on a day-to-day basis, are they coming to us as coaches or me as a physio saying, my injury's flared up again, I'm broken, I'm like worried that this is going to take me out for a like really long period of time? All of those things is like straight away nipping that in the bud. Are you injured, or have you just irritated it? Have you had a tweak? Like, straight away giving back that feedback of, just remember, this isn't something that is a injury and is going to take you out for 6 months. This is something that can heal quickly and may even take days for you to recover and not feel that pain again.
I think the bit I wanted to say in addition to that as well is when we're talking about like self-talk of being positive but being prepared for a negative piece, is people going into the gym, they say pain-free, and then they have pain again, and they're like, I'm not pain-free. But the preparation of being like, you will almost definitely experience pain signals again. And I think in the world of, like, this ties to physio so incredibly well, of being like, you are not pain-free because you experience pain again. Like, you are still past the incident, and that signal is going to happen. And so people have this kind of all or nothing mentality towards pain, in the same pretense of negative self-thought, right? Like, you say, competition day, I'm gonna do everything, I'm gonna do my best, blah, blah. And then when it goes wrong, it's, oh, everything has failed because of that. So cease of preparation. And the same thing with pain, of just being like, no, I'm pain-free, it's gonna be a good session, it's gonna be positive. But then there is pain, and then it's like, oh, I'm not pain-free, I'm wrong about it all. And be like, no, you weren't wrong. This was just an addition which you should have prepared for and anticipated.
Yeah, and like preparation for like those weeks where intensity is creeping up. Okay, we can expect pain. Like go into that, yes, with all the positive mindset and stuff like that, but do not be caught off guard that you will have experienced some pain. We are coming in off of a block where you have just been recovering from injury. We cannot be expecting the higher RPE to suddenly be fixed just because an RPE 5 on week 1 was fine. So yeah, no, even just like trying to communicate to athletes that like those sorts of things is huge. And you did a great way, like put out a great way of explaining that, and how like made me think about, okay, what language can I be using to my lifters during their initial appointment to sort of start implementing these thoughts in them, and not catch them off guard weeks after their initial appointment thinking that they should be healed by now.
One thing that I want to actually add alongside this, I'll preface this by saying that I am neither a physiotherapist nor am I a psychologist. However, in a lot of my recent experience with a few new athletes that have come onto the team and kind of dealing with some more nuanced issues, now part of this is including pain, but other things are including, like, be it mental health issues or be it like eating disorders or whatever it ends up being. There's a few things that obviously you outsource and you give that like to professionals, and they take care of those things and you work alongside those people. However, one thing as a coach that I've found really beneficial is being very, very deliberate about what word I am using to associate with what that is. So like, I find working through pain is not that beneficial. I really don't find that very beneficial for athletes whatsoever, for whatever reason. However, working with or working alongside pain seems to be an awful lot more productive for athletes. Like, for whatever reason, the implication of through seems to provide this, like, oh, there is going to be massive resistance to what I'm doing, and therefore I'm going to have to push this really, really hard to make it be so. And that's not necessarily true. Whereas when you are working with or working alongside pain, it is simply just this: your training continues, your pain comes along with, or what your issues outside of the gym come along with, or your difficult externals come alongside with, but it doesn't mean that they are directly in front of your path and you must outright overcome those and therefore have experienced none of it, right? It means that you will probably experience it for a fair amount of time, regardless what it is. And that's why literally just that one change of, like, instead of through, saying with, has been wildly, wildly beneficial for people, I've found recently anyway.
To tangent ever so slightly, just because this actually, I didn't expect, has brought up a topic that I really wanted to talk about at some point, which is something more that you see with different styles of coaching, right? So there's people who are very, like, younger coaches who are very new to it, who kind of like banter with their friends with how they talk to their athletes. Then there's people where I would say we are, of being like, it's a much more professional state of business, but there's also a very, like, it's friendly, it's you get along with your athletes. And then there's some types of coaches you work with who are like, I don't know what the term would be, like, just mechanical. Like, it's not just professional. It's like, there's not much tone, there's not much delivery. Now, the people at the top end of that scale, I actually think exist with kind of degree of safety net, right? Because we were talking about how tone can infer many things, like the celebration, and then without the celebration, the absence of it can deliver a different expectation. Say competition day, like Amelia, you've been handled, we'll talk about Beck, who, like, on comp day, there's no emotion. And so, and people have seen myself handle, like, there'll be moments of excitement, but most of the time my arms are crossed and it's trying to be neutral. And there does seem to be a huge benefit to living in neutral, because I was thinking, what's actionable advice, whether it's to a coach or an athlete, if you're handling a friend? And I would probably advise most people to live towards that neutral piece of actually not delivering too much emotion. Because I think if you get too excitable, as you express, which fuck, brilliantly done again, of like, if people are getting overexcited, then it's agitated, then it's nervous, and that energy feeds a bit too much. You could push the athlete the wrong way. And if you look nervous and if you look stressed, then that feeds quite negatively. And though I've been coached by people who have been like, oh, thanks, Em. Though I've been coached by people who I've been like, you don't seem that invested, it's actually kept me very level-headed, but I wouldn't say I enjoyed that relationship. So I think there's a really interesting like difficulty there to how you manage both of those things. You're going to jump in.
Yeah, I was just going to say, do you think that depends on sort of the experience level of the athlete? Because I think that staying in a really neutral state can be really helpful for some athletes who are a little bit more experienced, especially with like comp day, because they've internalized all of those thoughts and all of like their psychology beforehand, and they've practiced it like on multiple days in training. You can stay much more neutral because you can rely on them to give themselves the positive talk rather than the negative. Whereas I feel like some of the more like intermediate and beginner level athletes might need a little bit more, not necessarily of like excitement, but a little bit more of those, like you say, those the cues and the words for them to internalize and for them to be given the script that they should be thinking, even if they don't realize that that's what you're doing. You're sort of giving them something to repeat in their head over and over again.
Because I don't know if you wanted to reply, just because this is one I'll talk about for ages. Did you have a response first?
Yeah, so I wanted to say was I wanted to give an example actually. Lauren, my athlete that just competed over the weekend, I put in the chat of like listen for my voice, and that tend to help her. But she made it was a joke essentially. She's like, I hate how calm you are after I miss a lift, and she followed that up with like, it's probably a good thing because I'm usually a nervous wreck. And I was going to piggyback off Callum of like, a lot of the times for newer lifters, it's also good to be neutral and kind of calm, because if they see you as calm, they're like, okay, I could, like, it's not, my day's not over. We can come back from this kind of thing. And that's exactly what happened. Like, she missed her last squat and her last bench press, but she finished the day strong, 3 for 3.
Yeah, one of the big things that I'll say is we so often as coaches say to athletes that emotional regulation, be it up or down regulation, is probably one of the most valuable skills that you can learn. I would argue the exact same of coaches, in particular handlers on the day, is probably the most valuable skill that you can learn. The reason that I bring that up in particular is because I think a lot of the time it's really common to look at like the broad spectrum of emotional up or down regulation and be like, this is positive or negative, right? And to see this like really thin, narrow line as being just positive. And not to say anything as to whether that is true or false, right? I believe that person to person, that's going to vary of what someone expects from you and what they get. And you setting those boundaries is really important within your like, this is my top end of expression on the day, this is my bottom end of expression on the day. I think it takes skill as a handler to be able to know where that actually sits and what's most beneficial for an athlete. So some athletes, like if you are truthfully like 100% neutral on the day, it is really easy for people to be like, but you're not celebrating. Like, you just take this as the statistic. You just take this as like, okay, there's another kilos on the total. Do you know what I mean? And they can really feel then a detachment from you. And then on the flip side of that, knowing where an athlete needs to be. So like a while back, Cheryl gave the psychological model of IZOF, which is individual zones of focus, and how that is like a very individualized process. Like, you look at people like Bobby Butters, crazy high emotional upregulation, like probably some of the highest that I've certainly ever seen in an athlete. You have other people who are like reading books in the waiting room, no headphones before they walk out. Like, there is two totally different zones, right? And it's knowing that athlete as a handler, it's knowing that athlete and knowing where that athlete needs to be when it gets to limit lifts, right? Like, I know Sophie, for example, on that day, funny enough, whenever I was in the photo that you used, Kim, whenever I was holding her headphones, I said to her, like, maybe 2 minutes or 3 minutes out, like, she was flatter than she is most days, and she likes to sit higher, and I know that of her, and she's sitting pretty flat compared to where she's at. And without me getting really emotionally upregulated, all I had to say to her was, yo, get there. and she understood exactly what I meant, and she put her headphones on and she got to that place, and she ended up taking a record on her second attempt. And she needed to be there, right? That's just where she likes to live. That's her individual zone of focus. But the delivery of that on a handler's end is going, I don't need to be there to tell you that you do, right? And when if she were to miss a lift, I'm still in that same spot. So like, all of that to say, you can be in this relatively neutral space. You can still celebrate with your athletes, but you can very much direct the ebb and flow of how emotionally up or down regulated they are. And that's really, really important. Like, some people sit really high strung. I had an athlete at the same meet sit really high strung from when he was in the car on the way to the meet. And by the time he got to deadlift, he was so flat, like so flat, no energy left. And I'm like, yep. And that was one of the things that we learned of being able to like bring it up when it needs to come up and bring it down when it needs to come down. It's the very same thing with us.
Because one of the things I wanted to add to that, and where I was talking about like this, there's a newer generation of coaches, a bit younger, but there's also what I would consider like a type of coach who's very social media heavy, as a handler. And I find it really interesting to watch. So it's people who, Brandon, you're all giggling. I haven't even named anyone. I'm not going to. But genuine interest of like, so there's people who I feel like they handle for social media. So people who emotionally respond to a really high end, or they're dramatic to a high end. And so I was just thinking of an example. So if you just watched Sheffield, whoever did, if you saw Meg Scanlon, who her bench was just getting fucking destroyed by the refs. And then on her third attempt, she walks away and she just waves because she's like, I'm about to bomb out. It's fine. She's like sitting in this position. Now, if you take one of those handlers who would sit there throwing their arms in the air, you take someone who's going, I'm good with this, I'm annoyed, but I'm going to do the rest of the day. And you shift that regulation that we're speaking about. And like, you put them into an incredibly frustrated position. The rest of the day goes out the window. But those type of coaches specifically, because one of the things we've spoken about is like coaches being a competition and handlers being a separate thing. Because I actually think there's a lot more to be said for when people are handled by people they know, because we're talking about consistency and voice, right? So when I speak to many of my athletes, quite to the point, like we have a very clear type of conversation. It varies depending on the athlete I'm working with. But then there are handlers who, like, if someone trains with Alice, nigh on, I would say like Rachel might be a better handler for her at times, for the good vibe, having a good laugh. When there was a deadlift competition we did in-house, things played off positivity with some of the girls who were like just feeding off of each other's energy. And so I do think there's something to be said for like having a handler who is in proximity to you, and then maybe a game day coach who is not in some of that conversation, which modern handling doesn't allow because it's one coach in the warm-up room sort of thing. But I do think there's a missing conversation of like how good the emotional regulation is with someone proximity you train to consistently who knows you better, because I know how you respond to the conversation we have. I actually don't see you train. I don't know what you're like under the barbell in terms of like that attitude in that environment. And I do think there's something that's missed there. And so, yeah, the coaches who like throw themselves at competition somewhat for social media, who bring this quite abstract attitude that doesn't really exist for the athlete. I think you push the athlete stray compared to where they normally are.
I want to piggyback off of that. I see this a lot with the club, just like the type of energy that they thrive on, that some of them thrive on with the people around them. And Karen, very much like what you said, I often think, oh, you would probably be for that high regulation of excitement for when the time comes. You might be a better fit for that individual for that particular time. Yeah, I see that. I just wanted to add on to that. I do see that a lot in the club. And it has made me thought, well, how can I best utilize this? Obviously, with the last comp we done, we had we were lucky enough to have 3 handlers. And then we paired off people who we thought best would handle each other. And then I was there on the game day side of things. So more of the regulator, they were more of the let's build up the excitement. I know when you need to get excited. I know when you need to prepare for this. And it worked out quite well. Some things need to be adjusted, but I do want to say, like, there is a bigger conversation to be had there. I fully agree.
So I was jumping again because this is like now taking it to a different tangent again on just one of the points that you made. We were talking about like consistency in tone and conversation. I would like to direct this at Kun, but I don't know if you'll have an answer immediately. So if anyone has one, just please do just jump in. But we were saying about like consistency and how you deliver something, and you can shift someone's emotions pretty heavily, pretty quickly. What we're kind of not also saying here is we've all fucked it up. Like there's a point in your career, Amelia, whether it's in physio, you've used the wrong term and you kind of see someone go, oh, and not like they didn't like that you said it, but they've internalized that. I've done it where I've given someone a cue or I've negatively fed back in a moment that I shouldn't have. It happens. What do people think to the means of course correction? How do you undo that? Because you can't just go, oh, I didn't mean that. That's because it's internalized to some extent. Does anyone have an opinion on like how to make that correction? Amelia, you're jumping straight in. Go.
For me, I mean, again, from a physio, it's a slightly different perspective. But when I know that I've got a diagnosis wrong, and it's sometimes just through reevaluation, I've seen the patient for an extra hour and I've realized that no, what I've said before is incorrect. It's okay. When do I bring this up? Because if I bring this up now, and especially if the rehab plan will be exactly the same as what the previous, let's say it's two different tendinopathies and they're exactly the same rehab plan, is it worth me bringing up that I've got this diagnosis wrong? Because all of a sudden then they're doubting my ability, which, okay, fair enough, diagnosis wrong. But doubting what the rehab plan is, when actually we could have just stayed consistent and kept them in a headspace where they were already working towards exactly the same goal. So I think it's a lot about the situation you're in and the goal that the athlete has. Okay, do I need to actually make a change to, if I have screwed this up, do I need to be making a big change into what I do, or do I just adapt slightly without letting them know that I'm actually upregulated and I'm worried about it? It's something that is really individual to that person and the exact time that you're in. Because if that's like ages down the line and then you've reevaluated something, then it's probably a conversation you can have quite bluntly and quite quickly, and get it over and done with. But yeah, it just depends. It depends athlete to athlete.
I'll jump in on there again. I had it with Lucy when I handled her at junior nationals, sub-junior nationals last year, and it wasn't down to Lucy's performance. It was down to we just finished squat warm-ups. In my point of view, her warm-ups looked fantastic, and another coach came up to me and said, oh, you need to watch her depth. I got so flustered with that because I was like, what the fuck are you on about? Because I've just watched it. It was absolutely fine. And then Lucy saw that, and obviously Lucy's quite she notices the little details. She didn't say anything in the moment, and I didn't say anything because I trusted her and I trusted my own judgment over this other person, because I have a feeling he was out to fluster us in some way. So I didn't say anything to Lucy. She went and done her first squat, bagged it in, and then she was like, you look flustered. I was like, yeah, it was just another coach trying to throw us off to some extent. But she could read that I was like in that state of, oh fuck, that caught me off guard. Again, a mistake on my behalf to have shown that emotion as much as I did, but it's hard to navigate that because I strongly felt that she was absolutely fine. So I didn't feel like I needed to bring it up in that situation.
I'm gonna really, really briefly touch on this because Coombe mentioned it and it segues into this really, really well. There is like a statistic basically on the spread of communication and how things are communicated. And that is that 5% of it is what you say, 15% is how you say it, and the remaining 80% is your body language. So if you do not open your mouth, you are still communicating 80% of the message. And that is really easy to pick up on. And I know, Coombe, you mentioned it, but like that your body language matters far more than you might think. I feel that because it is such a overwhelming majority of communication, that is worthwhile keeping in check as a handler, of understanding like what actually is my body language. Like I may not feel stress all the time. However, my wife, Kat, notices when I'm stressed before I notice I'm stressed, and it's because my body tells her quicker than I notice it, right? And so if that's happening with athletes on the day, that is an entirely like different thing. Like I really need to keep that in check. And so it's a really important thing to be looking into like our body language and being aware of it.
Just to go the course correction bit, in the sense of like where you've administered like the wrong response to something. Because I was thinking this in a couple of different terms, right? So for instance, I'll take Rachel as an example. It's easier when it's someone in closer proximity, so I'm not going to get in trouble, but where basically her bench just went to shit for a block. And I went back through her program and was like, oh, it's me. Like it was my decisions in this bit. And we could pinpoint that. And there's a point with some people's programming where absolutely, like if you're like, I think, then I think you're probably not positively reinforcing the relationship again and the degree of respect of like, I do know what I'm doing. But when you can, like, same thing where Amelia is saying, where you can go hand on heart, like, oh no, it's this. I know it's this. And so I know where I've made my mistake. You kind of reinforce the, oh, I do know what I'm talking about, and I have checked, and it's the I'm not sure that typically people get a lot of discomfort from. In conversation, I think it's a harder one, and this actually relates more in relationship to someone, right? So if, for instance, I say to someone, they're like, I've just squatted this, and I'm like, okay, but the thing I told you to do was this. That might have been the right response, and the right or wrong response in that moment. What actually makes a massive difference, and this is where an athlete kind of needs to step in, is having the maturity to go, I appreciate that. Just so you know, I really wanted to celebrate. Because what becomes a genuine issue, and I've experienced this in years where some people just don't know how to talk to you, is months after the fact that, like, just so you know, that actually really bugs me. And then there becomes like a fracture in the relationship with an athlete where they have not just a distrust, but like they have an irritation, like a chip on your shoulder. And people have seen it in your own relationships, right? Like 3 months ago, dishes didn't get put away, and you're like, everything you do now fucking irritates me. You keep taking breaths, and I'm going to kill you. And so it's the same sort of principle. Like, if you don't deal hard conversations early, you create that issue. And I think that goes both ways. Coaches to go, okay, I appreciate that, but how we speak is not like that. And the other way around of going, I appreciate the feedback, but I'm trying to celebrate. And I do think that is a responsibility on both parts, and a maturity that, depending on who you're working with, may be an issue.
I wanted to piggyback off that too, because I think a lot of it comes down to just being honest, whether it's coach or athlete, but especially from the coach's side, like holding yourself accountable, like, my fault, I made a mistake, this is how we're going to fix it. I think that just plays a bigger role. And like, if I flip it to the other side of me being an athlete, if Callum was like, my fault, this is how we're going to fix it, like, I would respect that so much more than actually like questioning, like, okay, does Callum actually know what he's talking about? If he's honest with me and like can pinpoint where things are wrong and how we're going to fix it, like, that's much more respect to him.
One of the best things I think I've ever done was put a question in my weekly check-ins that is specifically like, is there anything that you'd like to communicate here that you would not feel comfortable communicating to me on WhatsApp? Right. And that is like, is there anything that I've done wrong this week, or is there anything that you expect better of me this week? And that's really like very much a one-sided question. If it's all the rest of them is me trying to gather that information from them, obviously, and get them to answer things of me. But that last one is really a good, important one, so that they have an opportunity solely to be like, gonna throw it out here, mate, and basically give me what for if there has been an issue throughout the week, or if they've been like, look, I didn't like how this was handled, or this, or whatever it ends up being. That has been, for me as a coach, that has been unbelievably valuable, because the immediate feedback has been like, oh, okay, that changes now. Like, that changes right this very instant. And you're much more than aware throughout the week of the thing that had happened. And it really just raises standards on all fronts. Of you're going, okay, oh, this person thought this person thought this, cool. Like, not that you're trying to be necessarily a people pleaser, but if it is not a direct correction on your own behavior as a coach, it at least opens the doorway to a discussion where expectations can be met on both parts, right? And that is of utmost importance.
I just wanted to add to that. I think the really important part within all of this, especially in the coaching position, is like the both directions remember that each other are human. Because I feel like some of the people that work closely with me or are just familiar with me will know that that's not always how I am fed back to, where it's almost this like inhuman. Like, I'll give you a really extreme example. I've been at a funeral and I got grief for not replying to an athlete, and I remember being like, human, like, at the end of the day. And so I think when we're talking about these conversations, being able to be honest is like having a conversation where it's like equally respectful. And again, I think there's a maturity on both parts that's really important. One of the things I wanted to add to was like the example we were giving about having these conversations about, I'm not sure about this, where do you stand? Brandon and I on Monday, when we were talking about your programming, right? You had a discomfort, we won't go into details, but basically had a discomfort. And I was like, I think I'm going to change these things. Brandon had the absolute maturity to immediately go, I don't want you to knee-jerk react because I'm in discomfort. Are you making that decision out of care for me or out of care for the program? And to which I was like, I would make that decision of data. This is the reason why. The maturity of that conversation was us, like, we will disregard that because we do conversations all the time. But that's actually a really good example. If I'm like, I want to make these changes, the athlete should be able to go, are you sure? Because I quite want to do this. Like, is there a reason? There's nothing wrong with that. But how that's handled is something that takes a degree of practice. That is exactly the same as comp day. Hardest thing in the world. You just took 192 and they're like, do you think 200's there? I'm like, I think it is. And your brain goes, I really want to say 197. You have 20 seconds left to have that conversation and you have to plan how. There has to be an already understanding between athlete and coach of like, whatever I say is with the intent of your best interest. And that's so hard to navigate in seconds. Go on, Brandon.
I need to say this because I saw a reel on Instagram and it was talking about like handling on the day, and they were saying like bonus points, or one of the sections that they said in the reel was bonus points if you have a call with your athlete before the day. I was like, bonus points? That is like first port of call. What are you talking about? Like, in order to actually have adequate expectations of what is going to happen on the day, personal opinion, you need to have that phone call. And again, personal opinion, it needs to be a phone call. Like, it can't be a loom. It can't be just a message that you send out. It needs to be a two-way street, because you cannot just entirely dictate how that's going to go. They need to have like this, even if it's someone's first meet. Like, I'm just off of a phone call with someone who's competing this weekend for the first time. And I was saying to him, well, if you wanna reach to here, cool, I think you're capable of it. What if this happens on the day? What do we change? And giving them that question of how would they handle that circumstance? Because if they're like, oh, well, if I miss my opener on squat depth, then I'll just go up anyway. I'm like, okay, well, that's probably not what we're going to do, right? So the expectations are met. But I just thought that was crazy that we were like, yeah, bonus points for having a call with people, when that is just absolutely the very first thing that you should be doing whenever people are signed up for their meet. Like, whenever you're getting into past peak week and you're into that taper week, like, that is the time to have that call with them, and to have a call with their handler if it's not you as well. Like, so important. I just that really pissed me off when I first saw it. I was like, what do you mean bonus points?
I will agree and push back at the same time, saying like, I've had people compete where I'm like, the call can't happen. But the key thing of what you said is like the expectations being met ahead of time. Is like, someone's like, I really want this, and be like, this is what can happen, and this is what will happen as best as we control. Because if a coach listens to this and goes, but I can't do phone calls, I've got other, I mean, like, the thing you need to understand is like, pre that moment, you need to at least be on the same page that if I say anything bar what you want, it's because I know we've spoken about it. Like, people who are going for records is always a great example, where it's like, look, right now there's podium or there's record on the line, and being like, if I don't already know what matters more to you, I can fuck your mentality up in a half second. And I had it this morning. A lifter was like, last one was 157. I want 165, and I went, it's going to be 162. And she was like, I shouldn't have asked. I was like, that's the wrong takeaway. Like, it's not that you shouldn't have asked. It's that you got the opinion you were asking for. And that's no negativity, because she'll probably watch this, but she'll understand where I'm coming from. So I think the means of communication is often, as Kuma said, like being honest, both being on the same page, and a degree of maturity from both ends of being like appreciating both the human and both are trying to figure out how to deliver these conversations.
I don't want to talk too much, but I do want to give a really brief example of the flip side of this as well. Milo had went in and competed. Obviously, Coombe and I had been working with him like flat out. It was during his Christmas Classic. And he had come in basically on an injury and decided that he was going to compete anyway. He finishes squats and bench. He finished squat 2.5 kilos less than what he had done last competition, which was a miracle in and of itself. And then somehow pulls a 2.5 kilo bench PB out of his ass with an elbow injury. Don't know how he did that. But it comes to deadlift, and he's with two of his other peers. He's with his wife and he's with a really good friend of his. And both of them were on track or had already secured 400 dots. And he was like, oh, he knew that was a goal of his. He knew he was going to be in the 390s if it wasn't the 400s. And so he was already really, really well on for it. He goes into... We went over the plan and we were essentially like, okay, we're going to give you the best kind of layup into this that we can to make it on, but that will be like the absolute maximal attempt that I will allow, right? And he goes into his first goes well, goes into his second goes well, but my gut is like, I don't think that maximal attempt is there, even though by way of like attempt jumps, like it's an even jump from first to second to third. And he was like, I want a gun for it. I want to go for it. He's got his position for nationals later in the year, so he'll have another attempt at it. And I was like, do you know what? We had talked about this. This is of a higher level of importance to you than just going 9 for 9. He had already made like an 8 for 9 day at this point anyway. And so he kind of, not really a Hail Mary, but one that is statistically definitely on the upper end of what he could do, and he misses it. And that was his gun for like 400.6 stops or something. Like would have barely scraped him in. And he was, in fairness to him, distraught for a while, but the lessons that he learned out of that in the conversations afterwards were so important. Like so important. And I think giving people the space to be able to go, okay, like I want this, hell or high water, it goes on the bar, that's what they want. In some instances, I will be like, do you know what? If you feel that strongly about it, I will plan so that that is a possibility for you. And then by the time his second rolled around, he knew that it was right on the line of being able to happen or not, and that it was a reasonable call. It was a limit lift either way, but it was a reasonable limit lift to call, and that's the only reason why I was like, yeah, go for it. But that came with a lot of, as I say, planning, expectations being met ahead of time, and then on the day, like being able to be with him and handle with him and have that call happen in that short 60 seconds between.
Well, oh, he's back. One of the things I wanted to add to that is like kind of a praise to coaches of a thing that you'll never get to see, which is like making a decision in the moment for what you believe is going to be the long-term best interest. So where it's like, and it's hard, right? Because you're taking a degree of a gamble. I know I've done this a number of times. Fortunately, I would say most of the time has paid off, where someone's like, oh, I really want this. I think I could do this. And we're going to take the lower one, because part of your brain goes, in a week from now, I'm certain you're going to miss that. And if you miss it, I know how much that's going to impact you negatively. And they're going to end up like, I feel like there's been decision moments where I'll bring someone to a slightly lower choice. The outcome's good. And I'm like, I think that nigh on kept you in the sport, where people like nearly pushed too hard, where the comp was going to just flatten them mentally. I had a guy compete a couple of weeks ago, and he missed his third squat. Handler made a crazy choice, won't even comment on it. Third bench, his back cramped, and he missed, and we're like, we're 4 for 6 at this point. That third deadlift we're getting, and he hit his second, and then his third deadlift was like, I think I have this, and I brought it down by 5 kilos. He hit kind of skin of his teeth, and then literally a couple of days later, it was like, I'm so glad you made that. I needed the win. And being like, if I had said no, and you had gone 6 for 9, you'd missed every third attempt, and this guy's he's having a rough time. Won't names give context, but he's having a rough time. Genuinely think that could have been I'm going to take a break for a while. And I would say 90% of people who say that in powerlifting just don't come back. And not to say that he has to stay in the sport, but you see the point I'm making of being like, sometimes those decision calls, making it for the best interest of the athlete, if you really believe that, just praise to it, because it doesn't really get seen or thanked. And normally other lifters are like, you had a couple of kilos in the tank, and you're like, I fucking made the right call. I know I did.
Yeah, we say all the time that longevity is the name of the game when it comes to the off season or keeping people healthy, but we never really say that longevity is the name of the game whenever it comes to what's going on upstairs, particularly when it comes to meet day. I think a lot of people going over this whole, and this is an entirely different thing, but like the whole 9 for 9 being an overrated thing, or it just means that you're taking a soft meat or whatever. I'm like, just bollocks. Like, I just don't think that even soft meats, like even one of the best meats that I have ever had, and the most enjoyable meat I have ever had, was the second meat that I ever went 9 for 9. And that was the one that I took as a very deliberately soft meat in the lead up to Open Nationals. Funnest meat I've ever had. Came out with PBs all across the board. Did really well. Like, really, really thoroughly enjoyed myself. And then went into this phase of like really deep prep where I'm now like trying to extend my life as an under 74 kilo lifter, even though I do not belong here, and that is having its repercussions on me. But it is literally that meat kind of fueled me for what that process was going to be, because I don't actually know if I would have handled what I'm going through now if I had not had that 9 for 9 meat. And it was soft. Like, it wasn't just 9 for 9 good calls, best possible outcome. It was 9 for 9 like, yeah, there was definitely scope to do a good bit more, actually. And we made the decision not to. And like people, again, they say that like longevity is the name of the game all the time, but then we also shirk people for going 9 for 9 or taking soft meats or like playing a long-term strategy. Like we do not live for the finite game. Like we do not play finite games, right? We do not play like, oh, it's until I get here and then the game's over. A lot of us, or at least in my roster, a lot of my athletes really understand what the infinite game is, and the goal of the infinite game is just don't stop playing the game. Sometimes that means you need a soft meat. Sometimes that means you need a really hard one, right? But it just means that no matter what happens, that you do not stop playing the game. And like in speaking to people about their language and their self-talk in the off season, be it deep off season or when they're in prep, like that has had the most impact when paired with that ideology of like we play the infinite game. Like the only goal is to just continue playing.
To as much as I would genuinely love to keep doing this for a lot longer, we're already at the hour mark, so I think we'll wrap up there, and that's a nice place to finish. Kurm, I just want to say, like, brilliant presentation, and I think a conversation we could have had for a couple of hours. I'll be honest, I could keep doing this, but very, very well done. I think our next episode. Who's taking over the next one? Is it Alice on your inquiry calls one?
I'm on the 18th.
It might
So
be
that's
the next
not next
one.
week, it's the week after.
No idea. We'll see. But yeah, thank you, Kurm. Very well done. And if you enjoyed watching this, there'll be more episodes coming soon.